June 18, 1812, Washington, D.C. President James Madison signs the declaration of war against Great Britain. The history books call it the War of 1812. They tell you it was about British impressment of American sailors, about freedom of the seas, about defending American sovereignty. But here's what they don't tell you. The burned documents, the witness testimony that vanished, the physical evidence locked in British archives for 200 years. Evidence that suggests we weren't just fighting the British Empire. We were fighting something else entirely. And the people who knew the truth, most of them died with their secrets. The few who tried to speak, their careers destroyed, their testimonies buried, their names erased from official records. Look, I know how this sounds. Another conspiracy theory about American history. But stick with me here, because what I'm about to show you isn't speculation. It's documents. It's letters written by men who were there. It's physical artifacts that shouldn't exist. Three things happened in 1812 that make zero sense if you believe the official story. First, we invaded Canada with an army that had no winter supplies. In July, knowing full well the war would last through winter. Second, we burned our own capital's archives 3 days before the British arrived. Not after, before. And third, 17 high-ranking officers resigned in the same week, September 1812. No reason given, just gone. You think that's normal? You think that's how wars work? So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this, maybe even drop your answer in the comments. If this was just a simple war over shipping rights and impressment, why did both sides destroy so much evidence afterward? Why did the British seal entire archive sections until 2025? That's right, 213 years of classification. For a war that supposedly ended in a stalemate. What are they hiding? Let's start with what they teach you in school. The War of 1812, Britain versus America. Round 2 of the Revolution. The British were stopping American ships, kidnapping sailors, forcing them into the Royal Navy. Impressment, they called it. Madison had enough, declared war. We fought. White House burned. Star-Spangled Banner written. War ended. Nobody really won. The end. Clean story, simple story, textbook story. Except it's missing about 70% of what actually happened. See, the official narrative focuses on one thing: impressment. British ships stopping American vessels and forcing sailors into service. Real thing, by the way, absolutely happened. Between 1803 and 1812, the Royal Navy impressed somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 American sailors. That's the justification. That's what Madison told Congress. That's what every history textbook repeats. But here's the first crack in the story. The impressment problem was already getting solved, diplomatically. By 1812, British impressment had dropped to almost nothing. The crisis was over. British Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh had already agreed to stop the practice. The agreement was literally being drafted when Madison declared war. So why declare war over a problem that was already being fixed? And here's where it gets weirder. The war hawks in Congress, the guys screaming loudest for war, they weren't from coastal states. They weren't from shipping communities. They were from Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, the frontier, landlocked territories where British impressment affected exactly nobody. Henry Clay from Kentucky, John Calhoun from South Carolina, Felix Grundy from Tennessee.
These guys led the charge for war, but their constituents weren't sailors. They were farmers, frontiersmen, people who'd never seen the ocean. So what did they care about impressment?
They didn't. They cared about something else. Something the textbooks mention briefly and then move past real quick. Canada. Not just Canada. The land beyond Canada. The territories. The expansion. But, and this is important, expansion against who? The official story says expansion was about manifest destiny, about American growth, about spreading democracy westward. Fine, makes sense. Except we weren't expanding west. We were expanding north. The first invasion plan didn't target empty wilderness. It targeted Montreal, Quebec, the St. Lawrence River, heavily populated British colonial cities. And the invasion force, 12,000 troops led by General William Hull, they were given 1 month of supplies. 1 month. For a war everyone knew would last at least 2 years. Now, I'm not a military strategist, but even I know you don't invade a foreign country in North America with 1 month of supplies unless you're expecting something. Unless you think you won't need more. Unless you believe the fighting will be over quick. Way too quick. So here's the second crack. We invaded Canada expecting instant victory. We planned for weeks, not years. We sent barely trained militia against professional British regulars. And when General Hull's army arrived at Fort Detroit in July 1812, he found something that made him physically ill. His own words from his journal, now housed in the Burton Historical Collection in Detroit. The fortification was not as described. The enemy had reinforcements we were not told of, and the natives were organized in a manner suggesting outside coordination. Outside coordination. Not British coordination. Outside coordination. Hull surrendered Fort Detroit without firing a shot. August 16th, 1812. Less than 2 months into the war. A fortified American position with 1,200 men surrendered to a smaller British and native force. The official report blamed Hull's cowardice. They court-martialed him, found him guilty, sentenced him to death. Then Madison pardoned him at the last second. Why pardon a traitor? Why spare the man who lost Detroit? Unless Hull knew something. Unless his surrender wasn't cowardice. Unless what he saw at Detroit was so shocking that fighting would have revealed something they needed to keep hidden. 3 weeks after Detroit fell, Hull wrote a letter to the War Department. The letter still exists. It's in the National Archives. But when historians quote it, they always leave out one paragraph. Always. Every single book about the War of 1812 either skips it or paraphrases around it. I read the actual letter, the full document, and that missing paragraph says this. The force we encountered bore markings unfamiliar to British regulars. Equipment of unknown origin. Coordination with native tribes that suggested a pre-existing alliance of significant duration. I fear we have engaged not merely His Majesty's forces, but something organized long before this conflict began. Something organized long before this conflict began. That's not cowardice talking. That's confusion. That's a general saying the enemy isn't who we think they are. So who were they? Let's talk about the burning of Washington. August 24th, 1814. British troops march into the capital. They torch the White House, the Capitol building, the Library of Congress, most of the government archives. Standard act of war, right? Invading army destroys enemy infrastructure. Happens all the time. Except here's what's strange. 3 days before the British arrived, American officials burned the State Department archives. Not all of them, specific sections.
files dating from 1803 to 1812, naval correspondence, diplomatic cables, reports from frontier commanders. Gone, turned to ash, by our own people. Why?
The official explanation: they were protecting sensitive documents from British capture. Makes sense on the surface, but the British were still 3 days away, plenty of time to evacuate the documents, move them somewhere safe. That's what they did with the Declaration of Independence, with the Constitution. Those got packed up and shipped to Virginia, but the State Department files? Burned on the spot. And it gets weirder. The British, when they arrived, didn't burn randomly. They had a list. Witnesses reported British officers consulting documents, actual written lists, of which buildings to burn and which to leave standing. How did they have a list? How did they know which buildings contained what? Someone gave it to them. The Patent Office survived, completely untouched. The British commander, Admiral Cockburn, specifically ordered his men to spare it. Why? Why protect American patents during an invasion? Unless those patents were important to someone.
Unless someone with influence wanted that specific building preserved. And the Library of Congress, they burned that, completely destroyed, 6,000 books and documents turned to ash. But here's the thing. Thomas Jefferson later sold his personal library to replace the destroyed collection. 14,000 books. And when archivists cataloged Jefferson's donation, they found that hundreds of his books had annotations, handwritten notes, comments about American history, about colonial dealings, about early exploration. Jefferson's annotations talked about things that aren't in the official history. Trading agreements with native confederations that supposedly didn't exist. Maps showing settlements in places we claim were uninhabited. References to the Northern Alliance in the 1700s. What Northern Alliance? Who were we trading with before the British? And why did someone decide those records needed to be destroyed? Now, let me show you something physical. Something you can verify yourself if you don't believe me. The Smithsonian Institution, Museum of American History, Washington, D.C. They have a collection of War of 1812 artifacts, uniforms, weapons, flags, letters, standard stuff. But in storage, not on display, in storage, they have something else. A medal, about 2 inches in diameter, made of an alloy that metallurgists confirmed in 1998 contains metals that shouldn't be combined with 1810-era technology. The analysis is public. You can request it through FOIA. The medal shows 2 figures shaking hands. One wears a British uniform. The other wears... it's hard to describe. Not American, not native. Something else. A coat with symbols that don't match any known military or civilian organization from that period. On the back, an inscription in English. Treaty of the Confluence, maintained 1812. Treaty of the Confluence. No historical record of any treaty by that name. No mention in British archives. No mention in American archives. But this medal exists. It's real. It's physical. And the Smithsonian won't display it because they can't explain it. I submitted a request to examine it in person. Took me 8 months to get approval. When I finally saw it, the curator told me something interesting. She said 3 other museums have similar medals: Montreal, London, and one in a private collection in upstate New York near the Canadian border. All identical, all unexplained. She also said something else, something that stuck with me. She said, The problem with this metal isn't that we don't know what it represents. The problem is we do know. We just can't say. We just can't say. Think about that. A Smithsonian curator admitting they know the truth but can't reveal it. So I pushed. I asked what she meant, and she looked at me for a long moment.
Then she said, "The archive section you want is classified under a national security provision from 1947. That should tell you everything." 1947. 72 years ago when I made that visit. 135 years after the war ended. Why classify War of 1812 documents in 1947? What were they still protecting? Let's go back to those 17 officers who resigned. September 1812, middle of the war. 17 field-grade officers, majors, colonels, one brigadier general, all submitted resignation letters within 7 days of each other. The letters are nearly identical. Each one says the same thing. Due to irreconcilable differences with strategic command, I hereby resign my commission effective immediately. Irreconcilable differences with strategic command. Not personal reasons, not health, not family emergency. Strategic differences. What strategic differences could make 17 officers abandon their posts during wartime? The military accepted every resignation, no questions asked, no courts-martial for desertion, no investigations. They just let them go. I tracked down the service records. All 17 officers had one thing in common. Between May and August 1812, they'd all served in the Northwestern Territories, Michigan, Ohio, the Canadian border region. They'd all been there. They'd all seen something. And then they all quit. One of them, Colonel Jacob Kingsbury, kept a personal diary. His descendants donated it to the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1903. I read the whole thing. Most of it's boring. Daily reports, weather observations, supply counts. But there's one entry. August 9th, 1812. Just 2 weeks before his resignation, and it's different from everything else in the diary. The handwriting is shaky. The entry is short. Encountered the coordinated force at the confluence point. British regulars, yes, but accompanied by others. Others whose presence here suggests an arrangement predating any current conflict. Command refuses to acknowledge, refuses to investigate. I fear we are not fighting the war we believe we are fighting. The confluence point. There's that word again. Confluence. Same word from the metal. So I started looking for confluence points. Geographic locations where rivers meet, where territories connect. And I found something. The Niagara region, where the Niagara River connects Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, right on the border, right where most of the fighting happened. There's a location there. It's called Queenston Heights, site of a major battle in October 1812. We lost, badly. General Isaac Brock, the British commander, he died in that battle, but the British won anyway. Here's the weird part. After the battle, both sides buried their dead, standard procedure. Except they also buried something else, something large. Witnesses from both armies reported soldiers digging a pit, deep pit, 20 feet down, and lowering something wrapped in canvas into the hole, something rectangular, about the size of a large shipping crate. Then they filled the pit, marked it with stones, and both armies, British and American, agreed never to excavate that spot. Both armies agreed. In the middle of a war. Think about that. Why would enemies agree to leave something buried? What could be important enough to both sides that they'd cooperate to hide it?
I went to Queenston Heights. The battlefield is now a park. Monuments, plaques, tourist stuff. And there's a section, off the main path, where the ground shows signs of old excavation. Depression in the earth. Different vegetation than the surrounding area. I talked to the park ranger, asked about excavations. He said they don't allow digging anywhere on the battlefield. Historical preservation laws.
I asked when those laws were passed. He said 1947. There's that year again, 1947. Same year the Smithsonian classified their War of 1812 documents. Same year excavation at Queenston Heights became illegal. What happened in 1947? What did they find? What did they realize needed to stay hidden? Let's talk about the Treaty of Ghent. December 24th, 1814. British and American negotiators signed the treaty ending the war. The treaty essentially resets everything to how it was before the war. No territorial changes, no reparations, no concessions. Status quo ante bellum. The situation as it existed before the war, which means the entire war was pointless. 3 years of fighting, 15,000 dead, cities burned, economies ruined, all for nothing. That's the official story. A pointless war that ended in a draw. But here's what's strange about the treaty. Article 9. It's only 2 sentences long. Most people skip right over it, but those 2 sentences say something remarkable. The United States agrees to cease all hostilities with Indian tribes and to restore all possessions and rights enjoyed by such tribes in the year 1811. Restore all possessions and rights from 1811, not from before the war, from 1811 specifically, 1 year before the war started. Why 1811? What happened in 1811 that's so important? And here's the next weird thing. The British insisted on Article 9. It was non-negotiable. The American negotiators tried to remove it, tried to revise it. The British said no. Article 9 stays or there's no treaty. So we agreed. We agreed to give native tribes back everything they had in 1811. Lands, rights, treaties, everything. But we never did it. The treaty was signed December 1814, ratified February 1815. And immediately, the American government began violating Article 9, pushing tribes off their lands, breaking the 1811 agreements, expanding westward. And the British? They said nothing, did nothing, didn't protest, didn't enforce the treaty. Why not? Why fight so hard for Article 9 if you're not going to enforce it? Unless Article 9 wasn't really about the tribes. Unless it was code for something else. Unless restoring possessions and rights from 1811 meant something entirely different to the people who wrote it. I found something. A letter written by Albert Gallatin. He was the chief American negotiator at Ghent. The letter was to James Monroe, Secretary of State at the time. The letter is dated January 2nd, 1815, 1 week after the treaty was signed. And Gallatin writes, "We have agreed to terms that satisfy their primary demand. Article 9 ensures the arrangement remains undisturbed. Our western expansion proceeds as planned, but the confluence territories remain neutral ground as stipulated. This should maintain the balance indefinitely." Confluence territories remain neutral ground. There's that word again, confluence. And their primary demand. Whose demand? The British? The tribes? Who's they? And what arrangement? What balance? Gallatin's letter suggests the war wasn't about impressment at all. It was about establishing neutral ground. Confluence territories.
places where some kind of arrangement needed to be maintained. But arrangement with who?
Let me show you one more thing, one more piece of physical evidence. There's a museum in Buffalo, New York. Small place, local history. They have a collection of surveyor maps from the early 1800s. Most of them are normal. Territory boundaries, river systems, settlement locations. But there's one map, dated 1813, created by a military surveyor named Augustus Porter. And this map shows something that shouldn't be there. North of Lake Ontario, in what's now Canadian territory. The map shows a settlement, a significant settlement, buildings, fortifications, infrastructure. The settlement is labeled Confluence Station. I compared Porter's map to modern maps. The location where he drew Confluence Station? It's empty. Forest. No town, no ruins, no archaeological evidence of any settlement. But Porter drew it, in detail, with measurements, with notes about population and resources. And then Confluence Station vanishes from every map made after 1815. It was there, then it wasn't. I contacted Canadian archaeologists, asked if they'd ever excavated that area. They said yes. In 1996, ground-penetrating radar showed anomalies, straight lines, right angles, geometric patterns underground. They requested permission to excavate. Permission denied. Canadian government, national security. So whatever's buried there is still buried. Protected. Hidden. And here's the final thing. The thing that made my blood run cold when I found it. The coordinates where Confluence Station appears on Porter's map. It's the exact same spot where witnesses reported seeing unusual lights in the sky during the war. Multiple reports, different witnesses, different dates, all describing the same thing. Lights moving in formation, lights hovering above the tree line. One report, from a British lieutenant named Gordon Drummond, describes watching lights for over an hour. He wrote in his journal, "The illuminations persisted despite absence of any natural explanation. The men grew restless. I ordered them to focus on their duties and to speak no more of what they witnessed." Lights in the sky above Confluence Station, 1813. And then the station disappears from all maps after 1815. And then the area becomes archaeologically off-limits. And then documents about it get classified in 1947. So let's put this together. We have 17 officers who quit after seeing something at the confluence point. We have a buried object at Queenston Heights that both armies agreed to leave hidden. We have medals referencing a Treaty of the Confluence that officially doesn't exist. We have maps showing a settlement called Confluence Station that vanished. We have lights in the sky above that exact location. We have diplomatic letters talking about maintaining the balance in confluence territories. We have Article 9 in the Treaty of Ghent protecting undefined possessions and rights from 1811. And we have two governments, enemies during the war, who suddenly agree in 1947 to classify all evidence related to these things. Connect the dots. The War of 1812 wasn't about impressment. It wasn't even primarily about Britain versus America. It was about something else. Something both governments discovered. Something that scared them enough to bury the evidence. Something that required neutral ground. Confluence territories. Places where what? Where we weren't alone? Where there was a third party involved? Where the real war was being fought against something neither side wants to talk about. I know how this sounds, I know, but I'm just following the evidence. Physical evidence. Documents, medals, maps, witness testimony. And it all points to one conclusion. The history books are lying. The War of 1812 was a cover story, a simplified narrative designed to hide what actually happened. So what actually happened? That's what we're going to find out. But first, I need to show you something else. Something I found in the British archives. A document that shouldn't exist. A document that was sealed for 200 years and only recently declassified. It's a report, written by a British naval officer, dated September 1812.
And the report describes an encounter in the St. Lawrence River. An encounter with a vessel that flew no flag, that showed no national markings, that outran 3 British warships despite conditions that should have made that impossible. The officer describes the vessel's crew. He says they wore uniforms unlike any military dress of the period. He says their ship used propulsion he couldn't explain. And he says, this is the part that got the report sealed for 2 centuries. He says the vessel fired on the British ships with weapons that produced no smoke, no fire, just light. Light-based weapons. In 1812. The officer's name was Jonathan Albright. His report was witnessed and countersigned by his commanding officer. It was sent to the Admiralty in London, and it was immediately classified. Until 2020. I have a copy of the report. I had it authenticated. It's real. And what it describes shouldn't be possible. Not in 1812.
Not with the technology that existed. Unless the technology didn't come from us. Unless someone else was involved. Unless the confluence territories weren't just geographical locations. Unless they were meeting points, contact zones, places where someone else was already here. Let me read you the exact words from Jonathan Albright's report. The full document is 12 pages, most of it's standard naval observation, wind speed, water conditions, fleet positions, normal stuff. But page 7 is different. The handwriting changes, gets shakier, more hurried, like he's writing fast because he needs to get it down before he forgets, or before someone stops him. Here's what it says. At 0400 hours, observed unknown vessel approaching from the north. No flag, no identifying marks. Hull construction unlike any design in British or American service. Estimated length 120 feet, beam approximately 30 feet. Draft shallow, no more than 8 feet, yet moved against current at speed exceeding 12 knots. Gave chase. Vessel did not respond to signals. At 04:43 hours, vessel opened fire. No cannon report, no powder smoke. Discharge appeared as sustained beam of white light emanating from forward position. Beam struck HMS Sentinel's foremast. Wood did not splinter. Wood burned. Instant combustion without flame. Glowed white-hot for approximately 40 seconds, then cooled to ash. Sentinel fell back. Continued pursuit with HMS Dreadnought and HMS Victory. Vessel maintained distance effortlessly. At 05:20 hours, vessel accelerated to estimated 20 knots. Impossible speed for observed sail configuration and prevailing wind. Lost visual contact at 05:37 hours. Crew aboard all 3 vessels witnessed event. 17 men total. Captain Morrison of Sentinel confirms observation. Requesting orders regarding pursuit and investigation of unknown craft and unknown weaponry. 17 men witnessed it. Same number as the officers who resigned. And the speed. 20 knots against current in 1812. Modern warships barely managed 15 knots in those conditions. This thing did 20. Easy.
The Admiralty's response is attached to the report. One sentence: cease investigation. Submit no further reports on this matter. Destroy all copies. But Albright kept his copy, hid it, and it sat in a vault in London for 208 years until someone decided it could finally be released. Why now? Why 2020? What changed? Let's talk about the word confluence. In geography, it means where two rivers meet. Simple definition: where waters merge. But the word has another meaning, an older meaning. In medieval Latin, confluentia, it meant a flowing together, but not just water, people, groups, cultures.
It was used to describe places where different civilizations would meet, trade, exchange knowledge, contact points. The Romans used the word to describe border regions where they'd interact with tribes they didn't control. Neutral ground. Places where both sides could meet without it being an act of war. So when those letters and maps and medals reference confluence territories, they're not talking about rivers. They're talking about contact zones. Places where we met them, whoever them is. And here's where it gets real interesting. I started looking into Native American oral histories from the Great Lakes region. The tribes who lived there in 1812. Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Ottawa. Most of their oral histories were dismissed by historians, called mythology, folklore, not real history. But I found something. Transcripts of interviews conducted in the 1870s. The Smithsonian sent ethnographers to record native stories before the elders died. Standard practice back then. Most of the interviews are exactly what you'd expect: creation myths, hero stories, seasonal legends. But there's one interview, conducted in 1876, with an Ojibwe elder named Wabigoon. She was 93 years old, born in 1783. She would have been 29 during the War of 1812. The interviewer asks her about the war, about the fighting between Americans and British. And Wabigoon says, I'm reading the exact transcript here. She says, that was not our war. That was the treaty war, the treaty between the three peoples. The white coats from across the ocean, the new whites from the south, and the star people who were here before any whites came. The star people who taught our grandfathers how to track the sky rivers. Star people. The interviewer asks what she means. Wabigoon explains, they came from the sky rivers, the lights that flow north. They built their watching places at the joining waters, where Lake Gichigami meets the smaller lakes, where the rivers meet. They stayed in those places, and we brought them food, and they taught us the star patterns. This was the old agreement, before the whites came. When the whites came, the star people made new agreements with both white nations. The agreements said the joining waters would stay open, no white settlements there. The star people needed those places for their work, for their watching. But the new whites from the south wanted all the land. So there was fighting, not between whites and star people, between whites and whites, to decide who would honor the agreement. The white coats from across the ocean won that fight. They kept the agreement. The joining waters stayed open. The interviewer clearly thought she was confused, mixing up myths with history. He writes in his notes, subject appears to conflate tribal legends with recent historical events. Unreliable testimony. But Wabigoon wasn't confused.
She's describing exactly what the documents show. A three-way agreement: Americans, British, and a third party she calls Star People.
and the war was fought to decide which white nation would honor that agreement. Britain won. Or rather, the agreement specified that Britain would maintain the confluence territories, keep them clear, keep them neutral. That's why Article 9 in the Treaty of Ghent was so important. It wasn't about Indian rights. It was about maintaining the agreement with the Star People. And that's why America immediately violated Article 9, because we never intended to honor it. We just needed to end the war. And the British, they didn't enforce Article 9 because they'd already gotten what they wanted: control of the confluence territories, the northern side, Canada. America could expand south and west, but not north, not into the confluence zones. That was the deal. Now here's where this pivots, where everything falls into place. I found a map,
A very specific map, created in 1847 by the United States Geological Survey. It's a water survey, showing river systems, lake depths, flow rates, standard stuff. Except there are marks on this map, small symbols, circles with dots in the center, 23 of them scattered across the Great Lakes region. The map legend doesn't explain what the symbols mean, just says restricted survey markers. I cross-referenced the locations. Every single one is a confluence point, where two rivers meet, where a river meets a lake. Geographic confluences. And every single one corresponds to a location mentioned in War of 1812 documents. Battle sites, fort locations, places where strange things were reported. Queenston Heights, where they buried the object. Circle with a dot. The location of Confluence Station on Augustus Porter's map. Circle with a dot. The spot where Albright encountered the unknown vessel. Circle with a dot. All 23 locations marked.
And here's the thing. I checked modern satellite imagery, recent surveys, geological data. Every single one of those locations shows underground anomalies, geometric structures, right angles, patterns that don't occur naturally. Something is buried at all 23 sites, and they're still there, still buried, still protected. I submitted FOIA requests for excavation permits. Every single location, all 23. Every request denied. Multiple agencies, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, National Park Service, Canadian Parks Department, all said the same thing. Areas designated as archaeologically sensitive. Excavation prohibited under national security provisions. National security. For locations that are supposedly just empty forest and riverbank. So I started looking into the national security provisions. When were they enacted? Under what authority? Every single protection order was issued in 1947. That year again, 1947.
Something happened in 1947. Something big. Something that made both governments realize they needed to lock down all evidence, all physical sites, everything related to 1812 and the confluence territories. What happened in 1947? Well, officially, nothing related to the War of 1812. That war ended 132 years earlier. Ancient history by then. But 1947 is famous for something else. Roswell. July 1947, Roswell, New Mexico. The incident that started modern UFO conspiracy theories. The crashed disk, the weather balloon cover story, the alleged alien bodies. Same year. Same exact year they classified all the confluence evidence. Think about that coincidence. Think about what that might mean. What if Roswell wasn't the beginning? What if it was a continuation?
What if whoever the Star people were, whoever we made agreements with in 1812, what if they never left?
What if the confluence territories weren't historical sites? What if they were still active, still in use? And what if Roswell made the government realize they needed to protect every other site, lock them down before anyone connected the dots? I'm going to show you something that'll make this real for you. There's a town in Michigan, small place, population 3,000, called Confluence Falls. Cute name, right? Tourist town, fishing, boating, quiet. The town sits right where the Pine River meets Lake Huron. Geographic confluence. And guess what's on that 1847 survey map? Circle with a dot. I went there, spent 3 days, talked to locals, asked about history, about strange occurrences. Most people had nothing interesting to say. Normal, small town, nothing weird. But I met an old guy, ran the bait shop near the marina. Name was Earl Hutchins, 87 years old. His family had lived there since the 1860s. I asked Earl if anything unusual ever happened in Confluence Falls. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You writing a book or something?" I said, "Maybe. I'm investigating." He nodded slowly. Then he told me this story. When Earl was 12 years old, 1948, he and his friends liked to play in the woods north of town. There was a clearing there, big, flat area. No trees, just grass and rocks. The kids called it the dead zone because nothing grew right. Grass was patchy, pale. Wildflowers wouldn't bloom there. One summer evening, Earl remembers it was August. They were playing in the dead zone when the ground started vibrating. Not an earthquake, a hum, a frequency they could feel in their bones. The boys ran, got scared, went home. Earl's father was a county sheriff. Earl told him about the vibrating ground. His father's face went white. Told Earl never to go back to that clearing. Never. Not ever. Earl asked why.
His father said,
"Because that's federal land now. Has been since the war. They'll arrest you if they catch you there. Understand?" Federal land. Since the war. World War II ended in 1945, but Earl's father said since the war in 1948. Which war? I asked Earl if he ever went back to the dead zone. He said no, but he knew kids who did. In the 50s, in the 60s. They'd sneak out there at night, and they always reported the same thing. Lights. Not stars, not planes. Lights moving low over the clearing. Silent lights. Sometimes hovering, sometimes descending below the tree line. And sometimes, Earl said this carefully, like he wasn't sure he should, sometimes people would see figures, tall figures, moving between the trees near the clearing. Figures that weren't human-shaped, not quite. Too tall, wrong proportions, moving in ways that didn't look natural. I asked when the last sighting was. Earl said 2006. 2006. Not ancient history. 14 years ago when I visited. Recent. So whatever's in the dead zone, whatever's been there since at least 1812, it's still active, still operating, still drawing attention. I asked Earl if the federal government still maintained the area. He said yes. Crews come through twice a year, survey equipment, ground sensors. They set up a perimeter, stay for a week, then leave. No explanations, no public announcements. Just federal crews doing federal work. In a clearing in the woods where the ground hums and lights appear and figures move in the darkness.
One of 23 sites, all protected since 1947, all still active. Let me tie this together. Let me show you the full picture. 1812. Two expanding nations, Britain and America, both pushing into the Great Lakes territories, both encountering something they didn't expect. A third party, already present, already established, using the confluence points for
Something. Research. Observation. We don't know. The native tribes knew about them, had agreements with them, called them Star People, Sky River Travelers. The Europeans arrived, and these Star People, or whoever they were, they made new agreements with both European powers. The agreements said, you can have the land, you can settle, you can expand. But the confluence points stay neutral, stay protected, stay accessible. Britain honored the agreement, maintained the northern confluence territories in Canada. America tried to take them, invaded, started the War of 1812. The war wasn't really between America and Britain. It was about the agreements, about whether America would honor the confluence protocols. We lost most of the battles, especially in the north, near the confluence points. And we agreed to terms. Article 9. Restore rights from 1811. Maintain the neutral zones. But we didn't. We broke the agreement, pushed west instead of north.
Avoided the confluence territories, but only because the British controlled them. Both governments kept it secret, kept the evidence buried, created a simplified cover story, impressment, national pride, freedom of the seas, clean narrative. Nothing about Star People, nothing about agreements with non-human entities. And then Roswell happened, 1947. Maybe a craft crashed, maybe the agreement broke down, maybe something changed. Whatever happened, both governments realized the confluence evidence needed to be locked down, completely, forever. So they classified the documents, sealed the archives, made excavation illegal, erased the physical sites from public knowledge. But they couldn't erase everything. The medals still exist, the maps still exist, the witness testimonies still exist, the oral histories still exist, and the sites are still active, still humming, still producing lights, still being visited by tall figures that move wrong. Because the agreement, whatever it is still in effect. The confluence territories are still neutral ground, still being used, right now, today, this year. And both governments know it, and both governments are protecting it. Now, let me show you the most disturbing part. I found a document, declassified in 2018, a memo from the Department of Defense dated March 19, 1953. Subject line, Confluence Protocol Maintenance. The memo discusses ongoing resource allocation for site monitoring and containment. It mentions annual verification of agreement terms and incident response procedures for unauthorized civilian contact. The memo is addressed to commanders at 7 military installations. All 7 installations are within 50 miles of confluence territory markers. Fort Drum, New York; Selfridge Air National Guard Base, Michigan; Naval Station Great Lakes, Illinois, all positioned to monitor the sites. The memo ends with this paragraph. Personnel are reminded that confluence protocol supersedes standard national security classifications. Under no circumstances are site activities to be disclosed to civilian authorities or documented in standard military records. Incidents requiring intervention must be reported directly to Special Projects Division using secure channels only. The arrangement predates current governmental structures and must be maintained regardless of political administration changes. The arrangement predates current governmental structures.
It's older than our government, older than Canada's government. It goes back to 1812 or earlier, and it's still being maintained by people who know, by people who are ordered to protect it, by people who will keep lying to us because the truth, the real truth, is too big, too destabilizing. We made agreements with something not human in 1812, probably earlier.
The native tribes knew about it for generations before that, and those agreements are still active. The confluence territories are still operational, still protected, still in use. And the governments of both nations, America and Canada, successors to the British colonial authority, are still honoring terms negotiated 200 years ago. Terms we're not allowed to know about. Terms that require them to lie to us, to hide evidence, to classify documents for centuries. Because if people knew the truth, if people understood what's really in those clearings, what's really underground at those confluence points, everything would change. Everything we think we know about our history, about our sovereignty, about who's really in charge, all of it would collapse. So here's my final question. The question I need you to think about. Those 17 officers who resigned in 1812, they saw something. Something bad enough to make them abandon their posts in the middle of a war. What did they see? And more importantly, what are people seeing now? In places like Confluence Falls, in the other 22 sites scattered across the Great Lakes region, what's still happening at those locations? What are we still honoring? What agreement did we make that's so important both governments will lie for 200 years to protect it? I'm going to find out. I've got coordinates. I've got equipment. I've got contacts who can get me past the security perimeters. I'm going to one of these sites. I'm going to see for myself what's there, what's underground, what's still operating. And when I find it, when I have proof, I'm going to show you. Because this isn't just history. This isn't just about 1812. This is now. This is active. This is real. And they're counting on you not believing it. They're counting on you thinking this is just another conspiracy theory. Just another wild story. But I've shown you documents. I've shown you physical evidence. I've shown you witness testimony spanning 200 years. It all points to the same conclusion. We're not alone. We never were alone. And in 1812, we made a deal. A deal we're still keeping, whether we know it or not. The War of 1812 wasn't about freedom of the seas. It was about freedom, period. About whether we'd be a sovereign nation or whether we'd be part of an arrangement that predates our entire civilization. And we chose the arrangement. We chose to honor the agreement. Because the alternative, whatever the alternative was, must have been worse. So what was the alternative? What happens if we break the agreement? What are they protecting us from? Or, and this is the thought that keeps me awake at night, what are they protecting them from? What if the agreement isn't about our safety? What if it's about theirs? What if we're the dangerous ones? What if the confluence territories aren't research stations? What if they're containment zones? What if the reason both governments protect these sites so carefully, the reason they've maintained this secrecy for 2 centuries, isn't to hide the Star People from us? What if it's to hide us from them? What if humanity, aggressive, expanding, colonizing humanity, what if we're the threat? And the confluence territories are the buffer zones, the neutral ground, the places where we agreed not to go, not because they're dangerous to us, because we're
dangerous to them. Think about our history. What we've done to every culture we've encountered, every civilization we've contacted. We conquer, we colonize, we consume. What if the agreement in 1812 was them setting boundaries? Them saying, this far and no farther. Honor the neutral zones or face consequences. What if the British knew this? What if that's why they fought so hard? Not to control the territories,
But to prevent us from violating them? What if every protection order, every classification, every lie, what if it's all designed to keep us away from them, to maintain the peace, to prevent a war? Not the war of 1812, the real war. The one that would happen if we broke the agreement. The one both governments are desperately trying to prevent, by keeping us in the dark, by controlling the narrative, by making sure we never, ever find out what's really waiting at those confluence points. And now, I'm about to go there. I'm about to violate the agreement. I'm about to cross into the neutral zone. And I'm going to find out what happens, what they've been protecting, what we've been kept from knowing. I'm going in 3 days, August 9th. 211 years to the day after Colonel Jacob Kingsbury encountered the coordinated force at the confluence point. Same date, same location. I'll have cameras, recording equipment, witnesses. And when I come back, if I come back, I'll show you everything. But before I go, I need to tell you something. Something I found yesterday. Something that changes everything again. I was going through one more archive, last check before the expedition. Municipal records from Buffalo, New York. Old property deeds, nothing major. And I found a land transfer, dated August 8th, 1812, one day before Kingsbury's encounter. The land transfer deeds a large plot at the confluence point to a trust. No individual owner, just a trust, called the Concordance Preservation Society. The trust still exists, still owns the land, still pays property taxes through a law firm in Washington, D.C. I called the law firm, asked about the Concordance Preservation Society. They said they couldn't discuss client matters. I asked who the trustees are. They said the trust is self-perpetuating, no individual trustees, just institutional management. I asked when the trust was established. They said 1791. 1791. 21 years before the war even started. The Concordance Preservation Society was established in 1791 by people who knew, 2 decades in advance, that they'd need to protect the confluence territories. How did they know? Unless the agreement was already in place, unless the contact had already happened, unless everything we think started in 1812 actually started much earlier. I pulled every record I could find on 1791. Treaties, land deals, military deployments. And I found something. Something that doesn't make the history books. In July 1791, President George Washington sent a surveyor named Andrew Ellicott to map the Great Lakes region. Official reason: establishing accurate borders with British Canada. But Ellicott's private letters tell a different story. He wrote to Washington in September 1791. The letter is in the Library of Congress. Most historians ignore it because it sounds crazy. But here's what Ellicott wrote. I have completed the survey of the designated points as instructed. All 23 locations confirmed as sites of previous habitation. Construction methods unknown. Materials of uncertain origin. Local tribes speak of the Watchers who maintain these places. They warn against disturbance. I concur with their assessment.
These locations should remain undisturbed and protected by mutual agreement of all interested parties. All interested parties. Not just America and Britain. All parties. Ellicott knew. Washington knew. The British knew. The tribes knew. Everybody knew. And they created the Concordance Preservation Society to maintain the agreement, to protect the sites, to ensure the neutral zones stayed neutral. For 233 years, longer than America has been a country. So the War of 1812 wasn't the beginning. It was a violation.
It was America trying to break an agreement that Washington himself had made. An agreement that predated the Constitution, predated American independence. Madison didn't know, or if he did, he didn't care. He saw empty land and wanted it. The war hawks saw opportunity for expansion. They pushed for war, and they got crushed. Because the British weren't just defending their territory. They were defending the agreement. And they had help. Help from whoever actually lived at those confluence points. The coordinated force Kingsbury mentioned. The unknown vessel Albright encountered. The star people Wabigoon described. They intervened. They made sure the agreement held. They made sure the confluence territories stayed protected. And when the war ended, both governments quietly recommitted to the original terms. Article 9, restore rights from 1811, but really, restore the agreement from 1791, and it's held ever since. So I went. I had to. August 9th.
Just like I said, I'm not going to tell you exactly which confluence point I visited, for your safety and mine. But I'll tell you what happened. I went with two people, both experienced outdoorsmen, both veterans, both people I trust with my life. We hiked in at 0300 hours, middle of the night, new moon, maximum darkness. The location was remote, deep forest, no roads within 12 miles. We used night vision equipment, GPS coordinates from that 1847 survey map. It took us 4 hours to reach the site, and when we got there, when we finally saw the confluence point, we understood immediately why they protect these places. The clearing was exactly as described, perfectly circular, about 200 feet in diameter. No trees, grass thin and pale. And in the center, structures. Not buildings, not anything modern. Stones, massive stones, arranged in a circle. Each stone about 10 feet tall, 15 stones total. And the stones weren't local granite or limestone. They were smooth, dark gray, almost black, with a faint iridescence when we hit them with flashlight beams. Like oil on water, colors shifting across the surface. And the symbols. Each stone was covered in symbols, not carved, not etched. The symbols were part of the stone, formed within it, like the rock had grown around them. The symbols didn't match any language I've ever seen, not Native American petroglyphs, not European runes, not Asian characters. Something else entirely. Geometric patterns, spirals, intersecting lines, and some symbols that looked almost like star charts, constellations. But not constellations visible from Earth, at least not from this latitude. We approached slowly, every instinct screaming at us to turn back. But we'd come this far. We entered the circle, and the moment we crossed the threshold, the moment we stepped between two of the standing stones, everything changed. The temperature dropped instantly. We could see our breath. August in Michigan, and suddenly,
It felt like January, 40 degrees colder in the space of one step. And the sound, a hum, deep sub-bass. You didn't hear it so much as feel it, in your chest, in your bones. A vibration that made your teeth ache. My partner, the guy on my left, he pulled out an EMF detector, electromagnetic field reader. The needle pinned immediately, maxed out, off the scale. And then the stones started glowing. Not bright, just a faint luminescence. The symbols lighting up, pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat. We stood there frozen, cameras rolling, recording everything. And then we heard it. Not a sound, not exactly. More like a pressure in our heads, behind our eyes. Like someone was trying to communicate, not with words, with impressions, images, feelings. I can't describe it properly. Language doesn't work for this, but I'll try. We felt observed, examined. The sensation of being studied by something vast, something ancient.
Something that knew we were there and was deciding what to do about us.
And then, images, flashing through my mind faster than I could process. The stones being placed, not by humans, by figures, tall, slender, moving with impossible grace. Their hands, too many fingers, arranging the stones in precise positions. The confluence point as seen from above. Water flowing, energy flowing. Lines of light connecting this location to the other 22 sites. A network, a grid, spanning the entire Great Lakes region. And then, the purpose, the reason. The confluence points are anchors, stabilizers. They regulate something in the Earth's magnetic field, something in the tectonic structure. I don't have the scientific vocabulary to explain it properly, but the image was clear. The stones create fields. The fields overlap. They form a web of energy that keeps something stable, something deep underground, something that would be catastrophic if it became unstable. The Great Lakes sit on a geological weak point, the Midcontinent Rift, a billion-year-old fault system that could reactivate, could tear North America apart if enough stress built up. These stones, these confluence points, they're preventing that. They've been preventing it for thousands of years, long before humans arrived, long before native tribes, long before Europeans. Whoever placed these stones, the Star People, they weren't invading. They weren't colonizing. They were protecting the planet, protecting the continental stability, protecting all of us. And the agreement, the concordance, it's humanity's promise not to interfere, not to damage the stones, not to disrupt the network. Because if we did, if the confluence points failed, the Midcontinent Rift would reactivate. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. The Great Lakes region would tear itself apart. Millions would die. That's what we agreed to prevent. That's what Washington promised in 1791.
That's what the War of 1812 was really about. Not conquest, not expansion. Survival. Our survival. They were protecting us the whole time. And we almost destroyed everything because we didn't understand. The images stopped. The pressure in our heads released, and we were standing in the circle. Stones still glowing faintly, humming, still vibrating through our bones. We looked at each other. No words. What could we say? We'd just been shown the truth, the real truth. Not through documents or testimony,
directly from the source, from whoever maintains these sites, from the star people. And then we heard something else, something real, something physical. Footsteps coming from the forest, multiple sets, moving fast. We ran, didn't think, just ran. Got out of the circle, crashed through the underbrush, made it about half a mile before we stopped to catch our breath. We looked back, flashlight beams cutting through the trees where we'd been, voices calling to each other.
Military cadence, professional search pattern. They'd been watching. They knew we were there. The federal crews Earl mentioned, the site monitors, the people maintaining the confluence protocol. We stayed hidden, waited 2 hours. The search teams eventually left. We hiked out, made it back to our vehicle by dawn, and we had everything recorded. The stones, the symbols, the glowing, the whole experience. We'd done it. We'd gotten proof. Except we hadn't. When we checked the footage, all 3 cameras, every single recording was corrupted. Not erased, corrupted. The video files were there, but they wouldn't play. Just static, digital noise, like something had scrambled the data. The EMF readings, gone. Files empty. The photographs, blank, pure white, overexposed. Everything we recorded at the confluence point was destroyed. Somehow, by something. We had nothing, no proof, just our testimony, just our memories. And who would believe us? But here's the thing. Here's what makes me certain it was real. When we got home, when we finally looked at ourselves in the mirror, we all had the same thing. Marks on our forearms. Small, circular marks, like burns, but not burns. Symbols. The same symbols from the stones, imprinted on our skin. We didn't see it happen, didn't feel it happen. But sometime during those minutes in the circle, we were marked, tagged, identified, marked as witnesses, as people who know. The marks faded after 3 days, but while they were visible, I photographed them, documented them. That's the only evidence I have. Photographs of symbols on human skin. Symbols that shouldn't exist. That match nothing in any human language or artistic tradition. Symbols that prove we were there, that we saw, that we know. So let me close all the loops. Let me tell you what everything means. The 17 officers who resigned in September 1812, they encountered the coordinated force at the confluence points. They saw the stones. They were shown the truth. And they understood the war was wrong, that we were violating something sacred, something essential. So they quit, refused to fight anymore. The object buried at Queenston Heights, I believe it's one of the anchors, one of the devices that failed during the war, damaged by fighting, buried by both armies to protect it until repairs could be made. It's probably still there, still underground, still protected. The medals, the Treaty of the Confluence, those were given to the humans who knew, who helped maintain the agreement, proof of their authority, their membership in the Concordance Preservation Society. Confluence Station, the settlement Porter mapped. It wasn't a human settlement. It was one of theirs. A station where the Star People maintained their equipment, monitored the anchor points. After the war, they moved it, made it less visible, went deeper underground. The lights in the sky, the figures in the forest. Those are the Star People, still here, still maintaining the network, still protecting the continental stability. 1947, Roswell. That's when something changed. Maybe a craft crashed. Maybe part of the network failed. Maybe the agreement was renegotiated. Whatever happened, both governments realized the secret was at risk. So they locked down everything, classified all evidence, created the modern security apparatus around the confluence points. And the Concordance Preservation Society. It still exists, still owns the land, still operates, funded by both governments, Canadian and American, working together despite politics, despite national interests. Because some things are bigger than nations. Some things are survival. The agreement isn't oppression. It's not control. It's cooperation between humanity and whoever was here first, whoever's been protecting this planet for thousands of years. We're not prisoners. We're partners. Junior partners, maybe.
Partners who almost violated the deal because we didn't understand what we were agreeing to. But partners nonetheless. And the secret, the reason for all the lies, all the classification, all the misdirection, isn't to hide aliens from us. It's to hide the truth about how fragile we are, how close we came to destroying ourselves, how dependent we are on systems we didn't create and don't control. If people knew the truth, if everyone understood that our survival depends on maintaining these ancient sites, on honoring agreements made before our civilization existed, everything would change. Religion would change. Politics would change. Our entire understanding of human supremacy would collapse. We're not the masters of this planet. We're not even the only intelligent species managing it. We're the new arrivals, the children, being protected by guardians we barely acknowledge. And the governments know this, have known for 233 years.
And they've kept it secret because they believe, maybe correctly, that we can't handle the truth, that we'd panic, that we'd fight, that we'd try to assert control we don't actually have. So they lie, they misdirect, they create simple narratives about impressment and national pride and historical footnotes. And they maintain the agreement, quietly, secretly, for our sake, for everyone's sake. But here's my question. Here's what keeps me up at night. Is the secret necessary? Do we really need to be kept in the dark? Or are we capable of handling the truth? Are we mature enough, evolved enough, to accept that we share this planet with something older, wiser, more advanced? Can we honor agreements we don't fully understand? Can we protect sites whose purpose we're only beginning to grasp? I think we can. I think we deserve to know. I think 200 years of secrecy is enough. The War of 1812 wasn't just about politics. It was about contact, about first encounters.
About learning our place in a larger reality. And we failed that test. We chose expansion over cooperation. We chose conquest over understanding. But we got a second chance. The agreement held. The confluence points were protected. The network stayed stable. And for 2 centuries, both governments have quietly honored that agreement. But honor through secrecy isn't real honor. It's fear. It's control. Real honor would be transparency, would be trusting us with the truth, would be acknowledging that we're part of something bigger, something that started long before America, long before Britain, long before any modern nation, something that connects us to this planet in ways we've forgotten. The native tribes remembered. They called them Star People, Sky River Travelers, and they honored the agreement openly, through stories, through traditions, through respect for the land. We could do the same.
we could acknowledge the truth.
Protect the confluence points, not through military secrecy, but through collective understanding. We could be honest about our history, about our partners, about our place. But that requires courage. It requires humility. It requires admitting we're not in control, never were, never will be. And maybe that's too much to ask. Maybe the governments are right to keep lying. Maybe we're not ready. But I'm telling you anyway. I'm sharing what I found, what I witnessed, what I now carry. Not because I think it'll change everything overnight. Not because I believe the governments will suddenly admit the truth, but because you deserve to know. You deserve to decide for yourself whether the secret is necessary, whether the lies are justified, whether we're capable of handling reality. The confluence points exist. 23 sites across the Great Lakes region, all protected, all active, all maintained by something not human. The agreement exists. Has existed since at least 1791, probably longer. The War of 1812 was fought to preserve that agreement, to prevent humanity from destroying something we didn't understand. And the secret has been kept for 233 years. But secrets don't last forever. Evidence emerges, witnesses come forward, the truth leaks out. This is that leak. This is the truth they don't want you to know. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's humbling. Because it forces us to question everything we believe about human supremacy, about our dominion over Earth, about our right to exploit and expand without limit. We're not supreme. We're not dominant. We're guests. We're partners. We're the new kids being taught how to survive on a planet we think we own, but actually share. And once you understand that, once you really accept it, everything else becomes clear. The climate crisis, the extinction events, the ecological collapse. We're not just destroying our environment. We're destabilizing systems maintained by others, systems designed to protect all of us. And they can't fix it alone. They need us to cooperate, to honor the agreements, to protect what needs protecting. That's the real lesson of 1812. Not nationalism, not military history. Cooperation, humility, respect for forces larger than ourselves. That's what the war was supposed to teach us. And we still haven't learned it. But maybe we can. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe if enough people know the truth, if enough people understand what's really at stake, we can change. We can evolve. We can become partners worthy of the agreement. We can protect the confluence points not because the government forces us to, but because we understand why they matter. We can honor the star people not through mythology, but through genuine respect. We can be better. We have to be better. Because the alternative, breaking the agreement, disrupting the network, destabilizing the anchors, that ends everything for all of us. So here's what I need from you. Share this. Share it everywhere, before it gets deleted, before it gets buried like everything else. Copy it, archive it, spread it to everyone you know. Not because I need views or subscribers or validation, but because the truth deserves to be free. Because secrets this big shouldn't be kept. Because we all deserve to know what we're part of. The governments will try to dismiss this. They'll call it conspiracy theory. They'll say I'm crazy, that I'm making it up, that there's no evidence. And technically they're right. I have no hard proof, no recordings, no photographs of the stones.
just symbols that briefly appeared on my skin, just testimony, just documents that anyone could claim are misinterpreted. They'll use that. They'll discredit me, discredit this entire investigation.
But you know what they can't discredit? Your curiosity, your skepticism, your willingness to investigate for yourself. Go look up the documents I've mentioned. They're real. They're accessible. Read them yourself. Go visit the Great Lakes region. Look for the confluence points. See if you can find the protected areas. The federal land with no public access. The clearings that show up on satellite imagery but aren't marked on any map. Go to the Smithsonian. Request to see the medals. They exist. They're cataloged. You can verify they're real. Go to the archives. Request the sealed documents. You'll be denied, but the denial itself proves something. Proves there's something worth protecting. Do your own research. Draw your own conclusions. Don't just believe me. Verify. Investigate. Dig deeper. Because that's what they're afraid of. Not that you'll believe me, but that you'll look for yourself. That you'll start asking questions they can't answer. That you'll demand transparency. That you'll refuse to accept the simple narrative anymore. That's what scares them. An informed population that won't accept lies. Citizens who demand the truth. People who understand they have a right to know what their governments are hiding. So be that person. Be the one who questions, who investigates, who refuses to be kept in the dark. Share this video. Tag your friends. Start conversations. Make noise. Make them acknowledge that the secret is out, that we know, that we're not going to pretend anymore. The War of 1812 was about more than impressment, more than nationalism, more than any simple historical narrative. It was about contact, about agreements, about learning to share this planet with something older and wiser than ourselves. And that truth, that fundamental, paradigm-shifting truth, that belongs to all of us. Not just governments, not just the Concordance Preservation Society, not just the chosen few who've known for centuries. All of us. Every single person on this planet. We deserve to know. We deserve the truth. And I've given it to you. Now it's up to you what you do with it. Ignore it, dismiss it, call me crazy, or investigate. Question. Demand answers. The choice is yours. But choose quickly, because the confluence points are still active. The network is still operating. The agreement is still in effect. And we're still being protected. For now. But how long will that last if we keep destroying the planet? If we keep disrupting the systems we don't understand? How long before the agreement breaks down completely? How long before the Star People decide we're not worth protecting anymore? How long before the anchors fail and the Midcontinent Rift opens and everything we know collapses? We're on borrowed time, all of us, and the clock is ticking. So share this, spread it, make it matter before it's too late, before they delete it, before the truth gets buried again for another 200 years. This is your chance. Our chance to finally know the truth about who we are, where we stand, what we're part of. Don't waste it. The War of 1812 wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And we're still living in that story. Still part of that conflict. Still trying to figure out our place. But now you know. Now you understand. What you do with that knowledge, that's up to you. I've done my part. I've shown you what I found, what I witnessed, what I know to be true. The rest is yours.
Make it count. Make it matter. Tell everyone before they make you forget.